Hey guys, it's Mike and you're watching Mike's Rockin' Relics, and today on the show we're going to be tracing more of the early influences on rock and roll and some of the music that helped set the stage for that. This is episode 4. So far we've talked about some early blues pioneers. We've talked about music of the 1800s. We've talked about early recording technologies and record labels. And today we're going to take this further kind of into the World War I era and what was happening in the musical landscape of the time. So stay tuned. So in 1915, this piece of sheet music came out. It was called The Allies' March, and there's a lot of music at this time now being devoted to the war, and it was certainly on everybody's mind. And this music was published in New York, but eventually released in Canada, and this is in 1915. And a lot of the music of this era were marches and songs to do with what was happening in the war. And even on the back, there's an advertisement here for another piece of music that you could get, Will Daddy Come Home Tonight? So everybody's certainly thinking about World War I at this time. Also in 1917, there was starting to be more of an interest in guitar music. And although ragtime and marches and things like that were still the most popular music going, the guitar was starting to become ever more popular, and the problem was nobody knew how to play them. And this book changed everything. And as you can see, this was made in 1917, and this is the original Guckert's chords for the guitar, and without notes or teacher. And somebody has changed the price on this before I picked it up, but this book has charts and diagrams, much like what guitar tablature looks like now. And these little chord charts and diagrams were very important for learning the guitar in the early days. And it's just a book of all the positions that you could play at that point. I do find it interesting that there are some things that are different now. As you can see here, it lines up the piano to tune your guitar and things like that. But even on this first page, it says, try this C chord. But if we look at how the C chord is played, for those of you who can read these charts, there's a note missing right there that at that time wasn't used. Here's another interesting recording from around this period. This album wasn't released until 1961, but it was recorded and collected by the Folkways Library series. And this is Lumbering Songs from the Ontario Shanties, and myself being from Ontario, this is songs gathered at lumber camps in northern Ontario that would have been sung by the various people who worked there. And you can see a picture here of them dancing and playing violin. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you're a big fan of rock and roll and you like records, guitars, and stories about rock and roll, be sure to give us a like and subscribe and ring that bell. It helps us to grow the channel and keep more stuff coming. Thanks a lot. So in 1917, the musical landscape is forever changed when a group of musicians from New Orleans that are called the Original Dixieland Jazz Band record the first jazz recording. And this is sort of a real change for the music industry. It's a new type of sound. Jazz was influenced from ragtime before it, and just had some slight tweaks to it. It was a very different style of music. It didn't sound like blues. It was different. Although a lot of blues recordings at that time that were made at the same time were made by jazz bands, and there's just slight variations in sound that really keep it from being a true jazz song. So it's very similar, and it also borrows a lot from vaudeville. There's a lot of vaudeville influence on this as well, and minstrel groups too. So it's a different style of music. It's a new part of the musical culture at this point for the time period, and it kind of goes somewhat unnoticed at the beginning just because of the involvement that North America had with World War I. Here's a bit of an obscure piece from the collection. This is the only thing I have that features the original Dixieland Jazz Band, and it's a radio station disc that would have played a selection of things that were already pre-programmed on here, and it would have just played as the DJs left or had a break or things like that. So this is the only thing I have from that band, and this would have been made much later. As you can see, Louis Jordan is on here. So I'm thinking this was probably the 1940s, possibly early 50s when this. And by 1920, though, the recipe for success was poverty plus war and blacks fleeing southern poverty and seeking jobs in the industrialized North. Jazz and blues musicians went with them. And cities were bigger, the clubs were better, and as it moved, jazz changed in style, losing its ragtime restrictions and taking on a looser, more flowing rhythm. At the end of 1918, there was a fellow by the name of Joe King Oliver who was a cornetist, and he decided to move his band from New Orleans to Chicago, where he started to take them on tour and play various clubs. And he picked up a young cornetist at that time named Louis Armstrong, and this, of course, would change the sound of jazz forever. And Armstrong's playing is one of the reasons that jazz actually started to sound less like the direction that blues was going in and started to be something that would stand alone as its own form of music. Louis Armstrong was so influential on the jazz world that music was never the same again, and his contributions are so important to the development of a lot of other styles of music as well, including early blues. But what it also did was it gave black musicians a chance to become stars, and that was something that hadn't happened yet. In the 1920s, there was no such thing as a blues singer. Pioneers like Papa Charlie Jackson performed in a variety of styles, depending on the demands of their audience. Using both a banjo rather than a guitar, Papa Charlie became one of the first bluesmen to record. After spending many years touring the South in various medicine shows and minstrel groups, sometime around the end of World War I, Jackson settled into Chicago and started playing street corners for small change. In August of 1924, Paramount took him into the studio in Chicago and cut Papa's Lottie Lottie Blues and Airy Man Blues. These were the first of more than 70 sides that Jackson was to record. By the early 1920s, sheet music is beginning to dry up, and the reason for it is a paper shortage in the United States. So the recording industry starts to take up the slack, and there are more songs recorded. People are buying more music now rather than sheet music. So the recording industry explosion is due to this paper shortage, and all of a sudden, blues, jazz, and other styles of music are being recorded for the first time. So that's a brief look at the music industry and what was happening in music around the time of World War I. And next time we're going to get into some of the more popular record labels of this era, including Columbia, RCA Victor, Bluebird, and Vocalion, and OK. We're going to look at some of these other labels as well that were small-time blues labels throughout the South as well. We're going to take a look at that. So this is what's coming up. I hope you're enjoying this series on the history of rock and roll, and we're going way back to the roots and starting out with how it evolved and became what it ended up becoming. So this series will continue for quite a while, but I hope you enjoy it so far, and I thank you very much for watching. Give us a like and subscribe, and we will see you next time. Thanks very much. Keep on collecting.